All right, let's go.
All right, I'm Sasha Nicole.
And I'm Star.
And I'm Dr. T.
And this is Amerikan Therapy, the definitive podcast on all things Black mental health, helping you survive being Black in America. So, Star, what are we talking about today?
Okay, so today we've got something that we've had several people call into the show and write us and ask about, hey, we need to talk about this. You talk about everything else. So this is where this one comes from. Black and bipolar, living a full life with a severe mental illness, and what does that mean? And I think because we've kind of been like, we wanted to talk about it, but then we didn't know how to talk about it. And I have a very good best friend who actually has bipolar 2 disorder. And, so I had some insight, but this one is one that a lot of people have asked for. So are we ready?
And we're ready. I think before we begin, because, we were looking at this over the past episodes that we've been doing. And one thing that we haven't been letting our viewers know is just what's going on with all of us. Yeah. So, we just be jumping into it because we're trying to get it motion. But I'm so excited. Like, we're in season 2. Can you believe it? As we said before. And we're just...
We almost ain't made it.
One whole year.
That's huge. So what's been up with y'all this week? What y'all been doing?
Now, this week has been crazy. Okay, so we're in DC area, most of us, right? So my brother was telling me this story, and then I see it on the news this morning about some lady macing somebody on an elevator in Walmart, and I was like, see, this is getting crazy. So I think all of us are like I was telling someone, I'm at my wit's end with the social distancing, and I'm like, okay, I'm holding it together, and I'm like, no, I'm not holding it together. And then I saw that story, I was like, well, damn, I ain't maced nobody, so.
Good. I actually was brave and bold this week and went to Costco.
Oh,
and it wasn't bad, but I felt anxious because I hadn't really been out. And the world is different. It's very strange. The world is different. People were actually very nice, which I was happy about. And they were very patient. Costco make everybody wait outside, and they only let a few people in at a time. Oh, and so I just felt like this anxiety, like, I want to get back home. Like, which is not me at all. And so, I'm glad we're moving in the right direction, but it's still a lot of angst out there. So the macing thing is, it's a surprise, and it's not a surprise.
It must be something wrong with me terribly. I've been going to the grocery store every week since it first began. And I was all up in the Costco. I don't know. I tried it for the first week or so, and then I was just like, either I'm going to mace somebody else or I'm going to mace the people in my house. So it's one or the other. And I chose to not hurt the people in my house. So I've been all willy-nilly. I take little drives. I go to the store. I've been going to the grocery store to get bread every week.
But you can go, driving is good. And I go for
walks. Get out the car though.
Walking all close on people.
I've been getting snacks and stuff that I've never eaten before. I've just been going in the store, just getting it for no reason. And so for me this week, as they're starting to open up certain shops and stuff, my birthday's coming up at the end of May. And I've decided, because I've been talking about cutting my hair for quite some time.
You have.
Cut it all off. I'm really going to do it. I'm going to stop talking about it and do it. And I made me a hair appointment at the end of May. I'm going to the hair salon. I'm going.
You can go to Georgia.
They open in Georgia. About me. I'm going to the hair salon.
So you're going to get your nails done too then?
Right. In Georgia, it's going to be open.
My nail lady has her own suite, and she's very sanitary. And I feel comfortable doing it. I'm just being honest. I'm just being honest. And so my appointment is on the 30th of May in Hampton. I've been scouring the internet for someone to do the big chop for me, and I've made my appointment, and I'm gonna be there. I don't know.
You gotta tape it. You gotta video it.
Well, you know, if I video it, and y'all might see like this rush of tears. You know, I'm so attached
That's
to my
okay.
hair.
You should video.
I know, but I think it would be good to share, like, you know, the real of it. Even though you strongly want to do it and you've been talking about it and preparing yourself, the emotions, that's another show. The emotions Black women have with their hair.
We got to do a hair show.
Maybe we'll do it after your chop.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. So
I love that.
So let's go ahead and get in. We're super excited. Like Star had mentioned, I have a very, very close friend of mine who has bipolar, and I can't wait to actually share this episode with her. So let's just dig in. As mentioned, I don't think we mentioned the name, but if we didn't, we have Charita Brown. And so Charita Cole Brown, against doctors' predictions, Charita Cole Brown has been living with Bipolar I recovery for more than 25 years. She was diagnosed with a severe form of bipolar disorder while finishing her final semester as an English major at Wesleyan University. Doctors predicted she would never lead a normal life. Despite that pessimistic prognosis, and because she sought treatment, Charita went on to marry, raise a family, earn a master's degree in teaching, and enjoy a fulfilling career in education. Her powerful story is chronicled in her award-winning debut book, Defying the Verdict, My Bipolar Life. She also has a BA in English from Wesleyan University and an MAT in early childhood education from Towson University in Maryland. She's a retired educator, and she's now a member of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, and also Maryland Board of Directors. She's also active in their local affiliate in the Baltimore area, and she's on a mission to help cure mental health care stigma by sharing her story. She's given keynote presentations at Morgan State, Alpha Phi Sigma Criminal Justice Honor Society, and she also has an active involvement in mental health education, and she currently manages assisted living style care for her elderly parents, and she also serves on the Baltimore City Women's Commission. So Charita, we are very, very happy to have you. What an impressive bio, especially given the diagnosis, because most of us, you know, would think that everything that you've achieved might not be possible. And so I'm excited to hear from you and hear how you've overcome that, what that has looked like for you, especially saying you've raised a family, married. I mean, those are big things. A lot of times people with bipolar are very afraid to even think about that realm or even think that it's possible for them to even do those things. So Dr. T, before we begin with Charita, can you chime in on exactly what bipolar disorder is? What's the symptoms? I mean, and I never knew that there was a bipolar 1 or a bipolar 2. So what does all that mean?
Yeah, so actually I was going to start with that. There's actually several different types of bipolar disorder. I think there's actually 4 now. As we learn more about the disorder and the different ways that it can look, they've been able to categorize it so that they can get people help more accurately. But bipolar disorder is a disorder where a person experiences extended periods of extreme moods. And those moods can be either very high, which have been referred to as mania, or very low, which we often refer to as depression, or it can be somewhere in between with a combination of the symptoms, and that's called a mixed state. The thing that is really important, because people will nowadays in our vernacular use words bipolar, depression, mania, like we use the words a, and, or the. But a bipolar disorder is a discrete period of a mood that's away from your normal state. So people can have these very high moods. Typically, we say they last at least a week or longer. But the really important thing is, with all of these different types of bipolar disorder, these descriptions can change. So it could be less than a week. It is oftentimes more than a week. And these periods fluctuate, but not typically within the period. For some people they do, but not typically within the period. So if you're having a manic episode or a manic period, you have a lot of energy, you may not be sleeping. Everything is to the extreme. So if it's religion, you're very, very religious. If it's sexuality, then you're very, very sexual. And it doesn't matter if it's spending, whatever the category is, it's over to the top. It's important to say it's different from your baseline. So if you're always sexual, I'm not pointing at nobody in this group. I'm just saying, if you're always sexual, then that's not a sign of bipolar disorder, because that's just your normal personality. So it's a change from baseline, very high extreme. Depression is, as we said, on the other end. Now, it's also important, people can hear voices talking to them, they can see things, and that can be on either end, on the manic or the depressive end. And then again, of course, in the mixed state. It's also important to know that for very long periods of time, people who have bipolar disorder can have no symptoms, and they can be absolutely normal, you know, as much as we hate that word, right? But they can have periods of a stable mood where they're just reactive like you and I are to the vicissitudes of life. And so I guess the final couple of things are, number one, it's a lifelong disorder. So these moods may come and go throughout a person's entire life. And most importantly is that it's treatable. It's highly treatable. Now, the treatment is very individualized. So it may feel like trial and error in the beginning, but if you stick with your treatment, you can have a productive, healthy, normal life. There are doctors and lawyers and actors and athletes and teachers and principals and any profession you can imagine, people who are living and thriving with bipolar disorder.
Are all forms of it treatable?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's good to know.
Yes,
So,
all forms are treatable. It may be more difficult and it may be more challenging, but all forms are treatable.
well, that's excellent. Because when I think of bipolar, like I think of, you know, not being in control of yourself. So Charita, like, thank you for sharing your story. I saw your book in a group, mental health group, and I was like, okay, we got to have her on because everybody's been asking about bipolar. And while I know people with bipolar, they haven't been willing to, you know, openly share this story because most people don't know. They're highly, you know, productive, would not know that they actually had a bipolar diagnosis.
Right.
So can you share, like, why you're vocal, and like why you what even enabled you to be vocal and say, okay, look, I have this and this is how I'm gonna proceed with my life? Because that seems to be, I had so many people to ask, and then I asked them would they be on the show, and they're like, nah.
For me, it's really interesting, Star, because I am a very private person. And I wrote a memoir, and my best friend, who is my prayer partner, sometimes we'll just laugh. It's like, she's like, Charita, you wrote a memoir. I actually put my business in a book. The reason I decided to do this, in 2009, I read this thing from Joyce Meyer. Joyce Meyer, the Bible teacher. Everybody might not know who she is. But Joyce Meyer said that everybody has at least one thing that they're put on this earth to do. So she said, what you need to do is prayerfully and meditatively decide what is your one. So I thought about it and I prayed about it. And this is November of 2009. The book came out in 2018. And my one was to write a memoir. And when I started writing the book and consulted with people who were, that was what they did, like the woman who does nonfiction at at Columbia, she was like, Charita, this is such a hard story. You really might want to fictionalize it. And I thought about doing it, because I was an English major, I'm like, and that's what I had studied, fiction. Do fiction, do an allegory, do all these things. Well, in my book, that's not what I did. What I did was, if you saw the book, and I'm gonna kind of hold it up so people can see it.
Hold that thing up. We can get it on Amazon too, right?
Get it on Amazon. Here's the book, but I'm gonna open it up because you know how people have like something in the front, higher, okay. My book actually opens with hospital records. So if you thought that this was fiction, these are, and my, the graphic designer for the book formatted the hospital records into the book. So each chapter and it's not a preview or a prequel, it is chapter one, because it's chapter one of my life. So each chapter starts with a quote. The quote is "Stare the rat down" from James Baldwin. James Baldwin's mother said, if a rat comes at you and you stare at him, he will run away. Now, Charita would never know if that is true because I'm afraid of rats and mice and I would run. So I wouldn't get that understanding. But that's what she said. And so I started the book with the actual story, with the medical people saying, this woman, she looks fine. She's in great shape. She's in great health, but she has no idea what's going on. She's not grounded in reality. And there's a term, it's called anosognosia. And anosognosia means you don't know what's going on with you. Like, you think that everything is fine. You think that it's okay that you're having all this sex or buying all these things and or whatever it is that you're doing that is really, really over the top. Everybody else that is looking at you knows that that is not okay. You are the person at the law party, and you are, this didn't happen to me, but something pretty close happened to a friend of mine. You're with the other lawyers, and you start doing some kind of dance, flipping around on the floor. And is that normal? Is that regular? No, it's not. And these things happen. So for me, with bipolar, I thought, because I am doing so well, it's important to tell the story. My book is endorsed by Kay Redfield Jamison, who wrote An Unquiet Mind. And she's the person people bring out when they want to talk about mental health. When Oprah wanted to introduce bipolar disorder, she brought Kay Redfield Jamison and Jennifer Lewis. So when you want to bring somebody out who knows something, you bring Kay.
And you bring Charita now, okay?
So I'm going to tell you what COVID did to throw this up in here. COVID threw a wrench because I actually was going to have an opportunity to talk about mental illness unveiled on March 21st with Dr. Jamison at the, at the City Lit Festival in Baltimore. So I was really looking forward to that. And it was canceled, but we understand that you got to cancel stuff. I was like, okay, it's canceled, but it's better canceled than dead. So we're going to go with canceled.
Yes.
And it was just such a pleasure to have an opportunity, because I know her, to have an opportunity to go on stage with her. Because what was going to happen, she was going to explain what bipolar disorder is. And then they were going to have me talk about bipolar disorder from the standpoint of an African-American woman. Because so often...
different? Like, how has it been different? Because I think of like everything I looked up preparing for this, and we were looking up stuff, was all white women, all white people. Not that we're not all human, but like,
right.
How has it differed for you being a Black woman with bipolar disorder? And just, like, if you share that at a family event, like,
well, my family, we on the edge, and they know that Charita has an illness and that she's okay. But I will digress for a minute, because you said at a family event. I wrote my book in 2018. My mother's family, the Stanley family, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, had bipolar disorder, and it was called manic depression. My maternal great uncle, her brother, had bipolar disorder. And so back then there was no medication. So they'd put you in the hospital. When you got better, calm, then they'd put you out. Your life would fall apart. And then you'd go back and, put your life back together again. So my uncle was a principal, normal school, which was like to 8th grade. So he was a normal school principal. Uncle Edgar was really bright. His life would fall apart. He'd go in hospital. He'd have to come back home. So when I wrote the book with my family, speaking of family, I didn't know, because they're like little silos. There were 10 children. My Uncle Henry didn't have kids because he had some kind of head injury as a child that nobody seems to know what that was. But of the remaining 9 children, everybody, and my grandmother was born in she was one of the later kids, but she was born in 1910. And all of those kids had high school diplomas. I have an uncle who was a chemist. a great uncle who was a chemist. I had a great uncle who went to Cornell School of Music. But what happened later, people didn't want to talk. So Charita does this book, and I start talking to my cousins, and we start talking about things that have been going on in the family. And I start finding out about my cousins who I know, but I didn't know they'd been in the hospital before. And people just try to keep it on the down low. It's like in Soul Food. Remember the uncle that was in the bedroom and they would just put his food down there? That man had a mental illness. And at the end, the one sister came and took him out. She was like, Uncle Henry, or whatever his name is, we're not leaving you in that room anymore. We're going to integrate you into our family life. But they just had him, he was like depressed, and he was in that room.
Yeah,
and you know what?
I was going to add to what Charita is saying about African American families and families of color, because I've seen this in my own patients. They oftentimes present with similar symptoms, but because of the stereotypes about our cultures, their symptoms don't get recognized or they get misdiagnosed. So, you know, one patient that comes to mind was a Hispanic woman. She was a master's degree. She was very, very bright, as Charita is saying, and she was extremely hyper-religious, among other things. And she came to the emergency room. This is when I was in New York. And she had been in and out of the emergency room like 3 times. And they just kept sending her home because they just thought Hispanic people were very religious, very Catholic, just going to church all the time, you know, about to lose her job. And I called her family and I said, is this the norm in your family? And they said, absolutely not. Like, she is, you know, we don't know what happened. And then it kind of got people, and then she got the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And a similar thing with African Americans, you know, we have a very highly sexualized persona in the media and in our culture. So a lot of times when you present with symptoms that are very typical of bipolar disorder, because of stereotypes and stigma, it doesn't get recognized. And then you proceed further and further into your illness before you actually get an accurate diagnosis and treatment.
Yes. And
Dr. T, you touching on that systemic
and that's what it is
we deal with. But Charita,
and that's what it is.
I want to ask you, Charita, when you talk about the family, that's an important point that you brought up. But I want to go back and ask you, at what, I know you mentioned like in the bio, you were diagnosed while you were getting your degree, but prior to that, what was your life like? Like, was there any moments when you were like, I think there's something wrong? Like, what were some of your habits? What were things that you did that you know, that made you go seek help? You know, what did that look like for you?
Okay, when I didn't look at any of this until it was time to write the book. When I was a little girl, I was very clingy to my parents. So I talk about in the book about being very clingy, not ordinarily clingy. I didn't want to go to kindergarten because I didn't want to leave my mother. I would have preferred to stay with her. You know, I didn't want to leave. That was what I wanted to do. I did a lot of crying as a child, a lot of crying. I was what we call hypersensitive. And I still am a person who, and it seems weird to people sometimes, but I'm still a person that can feel atmospheres. Like if I'm in an atmosphere and it's like, well, now they just call it taking the temperature of the room, but I can feel the atmosphere of a room. If I come in and it's real tense in there, I can feel it. That's something, you know, that's something that I have. But the crying was something. I would be really worked up, and I used to speak really rapidly. I've gotten better, but I used to speak really rapidly. And what my parents taught me, because they didn't acknowledge it as mental illness. And I'm blessed that they didn't, because I never would have ended up being able to leave the state to go to college if they knew I had mental illness, if they knew that was going to be me. But what they taught me was called rest your nerves. And rest your nerves works for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Rest your nerves means go listen to a record, quietly read a book. People call it meditation now. Go just relax yourself. You know, my father actually passed away in December. And my dad, even from his wheelchair, as I was at his house taking care of him, he would say, slow down. Charita, slow down. Well, he called me Yee. He'd say, Yee, slow down, slow down. And I said, Daddy, if I slow down, who's going to take care of you? I can't slow down. I have to take care of you. So, you know, I still have my mom. But the thing with that is that there were flags that I had actually gotten this illness. And there was a scientist, and I can't remember right now, but she said, if you have the gene for the illness strong enough, at some point it's going to manifest. And so for me, because the gene was that strong, it manifested in my life. And, you know, when we're talking about Black people, and I'm not only am I a Black lady, I am a Black Christian lady. So I'm Black and I'm church. So, you know, church people, no matter what they are, they can be any whatever. But if they church people, they will just tell you quick, just pray. That's what you do. And if you
crazy or gay in the church, okay?
Huh?
You cannot be church. You cannot be crazy or gay and be in the church. I'm just.
That's right.
Going like, look.
Church. So church, you better pray. That's if something is going on with you, you better pray. That's what you better do.
Charita, were there things that manifested as you got older? Like, what did that look like when you were a young adult into, you know, adulthood? How did that manifest for you then?
For me, as a young adult, after I was diagnosed, because I was diagnosed early, which is important. The earlier you can get diagnosed, the sooner you can get the help. So I was actually diagnosed in 1980, and then in 1982, that was when everything fell apart. But the sooner you can get diagnosed, the better. I don't usually do statistics, but sometimes I do. People who have bipolar disorder are 12 times more likely than anybody in society to die by suicide than anybody else. And nobody knows why that is, but it is a fact. And I'm not talking about attempt, because people do attempt suicide, but for some reason, people who are bipolar can figure out how to complete it at a greater rate than other people. And that is something that is documented statistically. And for me, that's one of the things that has made me want to tell my story and let people know, you know, I have a severe form of bipolar disorder and I am living well. Kay Jamison, severe form of bipolar disorder, living well. But what Kay Jamison said is that we have the silently successful. And I think it was Sasha who was talking about that. People are doing well and they don't talk about it. So people don't know. So people are like, well, everybody's fine but me. And that's not true. So the reason I decided to write the book was that I would hope when somebody gets to the end of the book, they understand I'm not any special person. This is not any special, well, this is grace. God has been really good to me. And I have done things that needed to be done to get well. And, you know, Sasha, to say to you, like one of the things that I did, and I'll tell you a little vignette from the book. I had no money. I had to borrow $1 to catch a bus to go to the mall. For some reason, when I am manic, I am so convincing. Yeah, so I went to the store with no money, no checkbook. Well, no, I'm sorry. I had my checkbook, but I didn't have any money in it really. And I bought $1,000 worth of clothing. And I told the lady that the money was not, I told her the truth. I told her the money was not in the account, but here comes the lie. But it wasn't a lie because I believed it when I was saying it. So you have to understand that people will be telling lies, but they believe the lie. It's like an improvisation. Like for me, it was like an out of control improvisation. So, I'm in the store and I'm telling her that my dad, who is not going to, but I'm believing that my dad is going to put the money in that night. So when you take the check tomorrow for this $1,000 worth of clothing, I will have this. I bought all these clothes. And fortunately, I have a woman who is now deceased, who I love very much, Dorothy Hurst. And she also shopped at this store because it was a store that only had 3 locations. So she shopped at this store and she actually took all the stuff back and they took it from her. She and my pastor, after I came out of the hospital, they collected all the clothes. Some of them I had worn, took them all back to the store. The store took them. I even had a necklace. I wear brooches. I don't really wear necklaces. I bought a necklace and I couldn't find it because I was losing things, because when I'm manic, I'm losing stuff. Mm-hmm. And they said to her, don't worry about it. We'll just write it all off. We'll take all this stuff back and that's that. But Sasha, that's an example of what it looks like. It's like when Dr. T was talking about it, you're like going between I am the greatest and I am depressed. So you're all the way up here, you're all the way down here. And the thing about the illness that can be so debilitating is that every time you have an episode, you start off up, down, up, down, up, down. But the more hits your brain takes, because it's a brain-based illness, you end up going up, down, up, down. And that is what the therapist was concerned about because of the frequency of the episodes. So when he told my parents, which a friend of mine is a psychologist, and she said, this was in 1982. She said, nobody worth their salt would say that to a family now, but that's what he said. And so what it was the death knell for me. And so my book, I'm holding it up again.
Hold it up.
Defying the Verdict, My Bipolar Life. And when this therapist said what he said, that was the verdict. The verdict was, you are not going to have any quality of life. You're not going to grad school. You're not going to do any of these things. Your life is going to end up with you needing a caretaker.
So how did you, Charita, I'm fascinated by your story. Honestly, like when I saw your story in this group, I was like, oh, we got to have her on. And we talked about, like, we got to talk about bipolar, but like, how have you been able to, because you're going to have the episodes. One of my dear friends, she still has her episodes. And like, I'll be like, yo, you all right? Like, you ain't right now. And like, how are you managing those episodes and managing your life so well? Like, is it a team? Is it a system? Do you have a tribe? What is it that's like helping you manage? Because I've seen where someone wasn't able to manage it well.
It's a team, it's a system, it's a tribe, it's all of that. Now they have something called RAP, Wellness Recovery Assistance Plan or something that people can do. Yeah. But because I got sick in the 1980s, that plan didn't exist. The woman that created that plan, that didn't exist. Somebody told me about it like a couple years ago, but I had to recreate my own because it didn't exist. Mm-hmm. I am a very innovative and creative person. And one of the things I will say, Star and Sasha, when you were talking about people with bipolar and you see all the white people, first off, white ladies will go to therapy. White ladies will go see what's wrong. More than any men, white ladies. I said to somebody once, I said, when it comes to mental health, be a white lady. And it didn't mean, because they will go get some help.
T-shirt.
They will go get some help. And so, we have to do that. We have to understand that we need help. And so for Black people, we have to get rid, because I can't cure mental health challenges. I can't do that. But what I do is share my story to get rid of the stigma, to get rid of the fear, to get rid of the dark blot on mental health challenges. You know, people feel like, well, if somebody has a mental health challenge, then they are less than. They're not as good as, you know, good as we are. I had brought up on my phone that stigma is when someone sees you in a negative way because of your mental illness. And then discrimination is when someone treats you in a negative way because of your mental illness. And what happens for me is that when I go out and talk to people, they're like, oh my goodness, she has a mental illness. She's doing okay. Looks like quote normal. Oh, that's
So speaking of that, Charita, when you know, in your bio, you were married, still married, forgive me if you are or not.
No, my husband died when my children were 6 months and 19 months old.
Oh, wow.
2.5 years into my marriage.
So that even adds to your story, actually, because you're already dealing with a severe form of mental health.
Uh-huh.
You marry, and I want to know, for our listeners who think that marriage isn't possible, children aren't possible, happiness isn't possible, you know, what was that one? Did you, I'm assuming, I would imagine you had that conversation with your husband. What was it like for you in that dating realm, in that, you know, believing that you could be married, and then two, transitioning as a mother? Do either one of your children have bipolar, or what was it like for you raising kids with bipolar?
That is such a fabulous question. You done asked about 5 fabulous questions, and I'm gonna try to answer all of them, Sasha. This was it. My husband was a minister, and so I was married to a preacher, and he had very strong faith, and I have very strong faith. And before I got married, I went to my psychiatrist. And have you ever noticed that a lot of times when people have bipolar, they choose not to have children?
Yeah.
They have a dog,
Yeah.
they have a cat,
Yeah.
they have a bird, they have fish.
I have an aunt that, like, yeah, she don't even have that.
Well, a lot of times that is because they don't want to pass the gene.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in our case, my husband, because of his faith, when I talked to my psychiatrist before I got married, he let me know that if I got pregnant, for the first part of my pregnancy, I could not take the medication. At that time, I was taking lithium because it would affect the baby's formation of his or her heart.
I'm sorry, not to be funny, but lithium just sounds like some medication that name sound crucial.
Well, it really worked for me for a long time. It was the medication that worked for me for a long time.
Wow. Okay.
So what happened with that medication, I had to go off of it if I was going to have a child. So when he told me that, I had counselors, I had my therapist, I had my husband, and I had my prayer partner. And I said to them, I'm going to have to pray about this, whether I'm going to get married. Mm-hmm. Because my husband had decided, he didn't believe in birth control. Mm-hmm. And that was going to be a non-negotiable. Now, we had already said any child I had, he didn't go to doctors, but any child I had was going to the doctor and all this. We had talked it through. We had a great pre-talk. So I said, you guys are going to pray. My job is going to be to get an answer from God. And I really believe, some people don't believe in God, and I tell them you don't have to, and however you go through mindfulness, yoga, I'm not knocking your stuff, but you can't knock tried and true my story. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do it, but you can't tell me that it's not my story. Mm-hmm. So what we did was we prayed, and God settled in my spirit. He didn't write on my bedroom wall. He didn't send me a note in the mail. Just in my spirit, the Lord let me know it was okay to go through with it. Mm. And I was able to have 2 daughters. Mm. My first daughter, I did because I wanted to breastfeed, and it really shouldn't. I should have gone right back on the medication. I didn't take meds the whole I said my husband had very strong faith, and he was like, I'm going to be your medication. I didn't take medication the whole time, but I needed to go on the meds and I wanted to breastfeed. So when my postpartum was both mania and depression, but I didn't have to go to the hospital because I have a tribe that you asked about. People in Baltimore, I lived in Delaware. My sister, my best friend came from, where did she live then? I don't know if she lived in Virginia. She came and took a week, and my mom was there, and my sisters, each of my sisters were there, my husband's aunt. People just came and sat and watched me and watched the baby and took care of me and made sure that I could make it through that really dark place. And it was just embarrassing to me. It was like, oh, the shame, I'm not strong enough. And I think that's a problem for some people, that they think they're not strong enough. But to keep on answering the question, with the second child, the younger daughter, I took my medication to the hospital with me. I talked to my psychiatrist. I took the medication to the hospital. As soon as I took my shower after delivering her, I took the medicine.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any of what I had with her sister. And the thing that is phenomenal, and I give credit to God for this, was my husband died when my children were 6 and 19 months old, and I did not get sick. But my family was so scared. They were like, uh-oh. And one of my closest cousins, she told me later, she said, Charita, she said, I really didn't know if you could make it through that because it was so traumatic. But I did go through the grieving process, but I had things in place. Like I called my therapist, and I was no longer in therapy. And he explained to me, because I was like, my husband just died and I'm not feeling this. And he said, Charita, that's shock. He said, shock comes from God. He said, God gave you that shock so that you could plan the funeral and do everything you needed to do and take care of these girls. And like the week, my mom stayed for a week. And when my mom left, I was feeding my children breakfast, and I realized my husband had died. And I just cried and cried. And I had friends I still had friends who were coming to Delaware to visit me, because I was from Baltimore, and coming. And the day after my dad, the day after my husband died, my dad came to my home. And I didn't have a job. I had these 2 little babies, and I was a stay-at-home mother. And my father told me to come home. He said, bring your children, come home. And my parents didn't have, well, my youngest brother lived there, but he was a young adult. And they told me to come. And you know, boomerang, you hear about boomerang kids. Well, I boomeranged with 2 babies. But what that speaks to is the village that God has blessed me to have. Because a lot of people have no village. And I have never seen anybody get well without at least one person in their corner. And then back to another question, we were talking about having a plan. We talked about, so I had these children, but having a plan. You have to, until I accepted my diagnosis, and so that's why my book's called Defying the Verdict, because as long as I was saying I didn't have bipolar and maybe it was something else, I kept getting sick. But once I accepted that it was bipolar disorder, and I did everything I needed to do, I didn't know that I was going to have such a long period of time of wellness. I just wanted a year or 2 years or 4 years or anything. That was just what I wanted. But what I learned was strategies. I learned to exercise. I learned how to eat. I pray. I tell people do what they do. I pray. People know about meditation. I meditate on scripture. One of the scriptures that I meditated on when I was in therapy, I became very fearful. I've been a very confident person, but when I got the illness, I just became very scared, like I was going to be sick. Oh, I'm going to be sick again. Oh, I'm going to be sick again. And that was where I was living. I was living on Fear Street. And what my therapist had me repeat 7 times in the morning, before I got out of the bed, before I prayed, before I did anything. And after I prayed at night, last thing at night was, God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And I continue to speak that over myself. You know, I talked about earlier the man that was speaking over the little boy that he was manic. It is very important what we speak into our own hearing. It is very important for me, hallelujah, to tell myself that I'm going to be all right. You know, and if I'm not all right, I have a sister, my oldest sister, her name is Val. Val's like an app. Val can hear over the phone if my voice, because when you're manic or depressed, your voice cadences actually go up or down. And at the University of Michigan, they are actually, if they haven't perfected it yet, they're working on an app that your person can have on their phone so that your person can hear when you are experiencing going into mania or depression. So I can't think of Sue's name, but it's the Heinz C. Prechter Bipolar Research Institute at the University of Michigan. And I can't think of Dr. Sue's last name, but that's what she's been working on. Well, my sister is that app.
So Charita, that's incredible information to know. Dr. T, to pivot on what Charita said, as she mentioned a few things, one about the village, and there's so many people who don't have a village. And you think of people, you know, when I think of my girlfriend who, you know, for many years has been my best friend, who experienced, you know, going in and out of the hospital, but who has family, and who anytime that has happened, her family is there. But so my first part of the question is, for people who may not have that village, what are some things that they can do? But then the second part, and Charita also mentioned that, is she has learned how to meditate. She's learned how to eat. She's learned how to do these different things that, you know, from your medical perspective, I'm assuming are helpful to try to manage this. Is there ever a part where, you know, when you speak of a mental illness of that magnitude, where you have to tell somebody you have got to do the work? Because I say this because I remember going to the hospital to visit my friend, and she was in St. E's. And I said to her, and I came in, her family was coming, and they were all like, oh, you know, and then y'all, I mean, you know, people who may know me. And so I came in, and I was like, and you know, because that was I didn't care, you know, what was going on with her. And I looked at her, and I said, you know, I said, when you gonna brush your damn hair? And she looked at me, you know, all doped up, and she just was like, and to this day, she always tells that story, because she said that was the one thing she remembers, was me coming in and saying that to her, because she said for the first time, she actually looked in the mirror and was like, well, damn, I guess I should brush my hair. And so I say that only because of that moment of, you know, one, like I said, what do you do if you don't have a village? But then two, like, how do you kindly tell a person who's experiencing something like that? Like, I understand you have a mental illness, but there are some things you can do as well. Does that make sense?
How do you be the village?
No, absolutely. You actually just said it perfectly yourself. So the hallmark of all mental illnesses, and bipolar is no exception here, the hallmark is that you lose insight. You lose your ability to self-reflect. You lose your ability to discriminate what's real and what's not. So you have to have people around you that you trust. And that's why sometimes people don't get better in the hospital, because they don't trust the people in the hospital, right? So you have to have people around you who can tell you the truth. And you have to be willing to listen to them. And as a therapist, we have this saying, like, you cannot work harder than the patient. So I can do my part, but we're a team, and no team works well with only one person doing all the work. You know, we see basketball teams where you got one superstar and 4 other people who can't play worth jack, right? They're never going to win. So a team has to have everybody pulling their own weight in order to make things work. And so you have to figure out when's the right time to say that to that person. And different people are going to say it in more than one way. The doctor's going to say it in one way. The nurse is going to say it in one way. The social worker is going to say it in one way. Your parents are going to say it in a different way. Your best friend. And during the acute part of your illness, one of those is going to sink in, and hopefully that's going to be your motivation to help you start participating in your plan. Because we have lots of people that we admit to the hospital, we get a court order, we forcibly give them medication, they get better, but then they stop doing their part.
Yes.
And they fall apart, and they get on that cycle. And those are the people that we see, that we think of as crazy, or that we see on the street, or that we see in very difficult situations, because you have to do your part as the person who has the illness. Just like if you had diabetes, they can give you all the insulin in the world, but if you keep eating cakes and sugars and the things that you aren't supposed to have, they can't overcome you. So eventually you have to participate actively and authentically in your own care and in your own life. So people need people like you were to your friend, Sasha, who will tell them the truth even when they're at their worst, because they need to hear it. They cannot see it. That is a hallmark of a mental illness.
If somebody's going through this, like you want to build your tribe, right? Do you tell your employer? Because like one of my girlfriend, part of it, we used to work together, and that's how we became friends, because I could see something wasn't right, but I was like, you a sister, I'm a sister. So I'm like going, cover for you and look out. But like, do you tell your employer, or do you try to, because you tell somebody you got diabetes, there's going to be a very different, or cancer, there's going to be a very different response than I have a mental illness.
Yes.
Because I'm going to tell you, when I had my mental breakdown, like probably, it might even be 15 years ago, I remember, this is terrible, but I remember being like, this other lady that I work with, she had also taken a medical leave. And she was like, she had cancer, right? So it was like, she came back, everybody was like, yeah, like, I came back, everybody was like,
Yeah.
you all right?
It's a very personalized decision. It's a very personalized decision who are the people that you can rely on. And, as Charita said, or I'm not sure if it was Charita or Sasha, but everybody doesn't have a supportive family, right? But that doesn't mean you can't have a village. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't have mental illnesses that don't have supportive families, right? So you have to figure out who are those people in your life that you're going to develop your plan with, and that you're going to share your plan with, so that you can be well. You would want somebody in your circle to know who to call at your employer if you need them to, but you may not want to share that with your employer. It really depends on who your employer is, what the policies are, how comfortable you feel. It's a whole variety of factors, but that would be, kind of the clinical response. I don't know, Charita, what was your experience with employers?
Well, one of the things that I always say, and I wanted to throw this in here, because I always say that mental health is physical health. When I have my opportunities to talk to people, and what was just said about you have cancer, you have diabetes, you broke your arm in 5 places. People want to sign the cast, they want to know about how you're doing, but because people don't understand mental illness, it scares them. In Beauty and the Beast, it said, we don't like what we don't understand. In fact, it scares us. And so, you have to be able to look at creating people around you. And my experience with work, there was only one job where I said that I had bipolar disorder. And it was in 1986. I was working at Johns Hopkins, and it was the first time I could feel myself getting sick. So I called my supervisor and our department head, and we went into her office. And I really believe that God does things divinely. When I went into her office with my department head to say that I needed to leave because I knew that I was getting ill, and it was a blessing because it was the first time. This woman's best friend had bipolar disorder. And what was the likelihood of that? And what she said to me was, Charita, what can we do? What do you need to do? how are we going to work this? What do we need to do? And I was out of work for a very long time, but you know, the people in my office, they were very kind. And when I came back, they were very kind. But everybody is not very kind. And I also know that my supervisor and my manager did not tell the rest of the office why I was out, because that would be for me to be able to tell. And you have to know, because that's your personal business. If you don't want, or if you feel people are going to look at you some kind of way or whatever, you don't have to tell people about your illness. Like if I have pancreatitis, I don't have to tell everybody that I have pancreatitis if I don't want them to know. So I don't have to do that. And it's the same with a mental illness, because the operative word is illness. You have an illness. Like I went through this whole period of shame, like I had done something wrong. I had not done anything wrong. I have a genetic illness. So the reason, as we had said earlier, the reason I talk about this is people need to understand. Say, okay, this is what it is. This is what the challenge is. The first step is acceptance. And my book is called Defying the Verdict, My Bipolar Life, because Norman Cousins, talking about cancer, said, don't deny the diagnosis, try to defy the verdict. And so for me, once I said, oh, I have bipolar, that began the healing process. When I called it what it was and went from there.
Rita, I love everything that you have touched on. I'm so fascinated. I know sometimes people look when I'm talking and be like, well, you know, because I be thinking, so I don't mean to frown, but I'm thinking.
Well, that's why, and people who think through listening, I think a lot of times we look down because we're thinking.
Yeah, and I fringe my eyebrows, and I just be, my wheels be turning, and Star be telling me like, I can see that you're thinking. So, but this has been an incredible conversation. Star, close us out. What's some thoughts? What say you, Dr. T? She's on mute.
Yes, Star, you're on mute. So I'll go.
Sorry. One last question, and this might be for Dr. T, but like I know Sasha over here closing me out. But I'm thinking, because we got
never fails.
I'll answer and close out, and then we'll go.
There you go. So we got a lot of parents, and like you said something profound. You had to accept the diagnosis, and that is the hardest thing seemingly in our community. It was hard for me. Mm-hmm. I've seen it be hard for other people. Mm-hmm. Like, how can us as parents be more able to accept diagnoses? Because a lot of, like, I have friends and I hear shit they be telling me about their kids. I'm like in my mind, like, yo, something ain't right. Like the teacher done told you, everybody done told you, but we're so scared of that, like the diagnosis. Like, so how can we as a community get better at accepting the diagnosis so we can get powerful about like maintaining our wellness?
That's actually a great way to bring in my closing point. So thank you for the setup.
That's you.
Because I think the one thing that every person who is diagnosed with a mental illness or could be diagnosed with a mental illness, a parent or child, is we have to let people know that there is hope.
Yes.
Because we are afraid to accept diagnosis because we think those diagnoses are death sentences. Yes. We are thinking that our child is going to go down some path and never be seen again. Or, you know, we've seen movies, and these movies are 50 years old, but they still ring true in American society about what we believe about mental illness. And so the most important thing that we can do to help our community accept their diagnosis so they can move on to the phase of treatment and health and then well-being, which is where Charita has been living in, you know, for years and years, is to instill hope, to let people know that these diagnoses are not death sentences. They are treatable. People can be productive members of society. They can have families. They can have children. They can have careers. There's hope. You just have to get on the train and ride it all the way. You cannot stay on the sidelines pretending like this is not happening. That's when bad outcomes happen. So my takeaway is I want everybody to remember that there is hope. If you or a loved one, your child, a parent, because people can get mental illnesses later in life. There's second spikes in late adulthood. There is hope. So get help so that you can live a healthy and productive life.
Can I say one last thing?
Yes, go ahead.
My nephew's wife read my book. You were talking about hope.
Mm-hmm.
And she said when she finished the book, she wished she had copies of the book that she could hand out and just say, here, have some hope.
Mm. Yeah. Tell her she can. They're available on Amazon.
she can't buy all those books.
Party favors. Star, are you going to do your
I got my two things. See, Dr. Royce, how we did that little alley-oop right there? So I got two things, as always, right? So the first thing was just gratitude for you, Charita, for being so transparent in your book, in your story, for writing a book and making a resource that people can go to if they don't want to have that conversation with somebody. That might lead somebody, like you said, to hear some hope. So gratitude, thank you. I know this is going to help somebody. I feel it in my spirit. And then the second thing, I love what you said about mental health and we have to take mental health like a white woman, and let me know. And Sasha is so great at this of anything that's wrong is let me go look into this. Let me go to the doctor for that. And I'm the old Black woman that's every time you go to the doctor, they just found something wrong. So I really love that because you're inspiring to me because you're not a sad story. You're if you take your mental health and your mental illness serious and you can accept the diagnosis, you can lead a very full life and be well. But you got to accept it. So gratitude, and then treat my mental illness, mental wellness like a white woman and just be all, be like Karen. Be like Karen.
I love that. Not only do I go and look at everything and Google everything and go to the doctor and be like, hey, treat me like a white woman. Well, no, act like a white woman. I expect them to treat me like a white woman. Y'all gonna treat me like a white woman.
There you go.
Come in and be like, what is that expensive bike, a Peloton or something?
Yes.
Be like, I'm rich and I have a Peloton and you will treat me as such. Nothing farther from the truth, but no. But seriously, to close out, now this has been great. And Star really kind of hit on everything I was even thinking. It's not a sad story. And oftentimes when we think of bipolar, we think of the sad story. I think for me, the only thing I would just close and say is that we just have to continue to remind ourselves, as Star sometimes reminds me, to have grace and extend that courtesy to others, because it is easy, even with I'll speak for myself, doing this show, being a mental health advocate. There are still moments where I side-eye somebody and be like, is there something wrong with you? Because I'm still a human, I'm still a person. As much as I try to reserve any type of judgment, because I always tell people I'm not the judge or the jury, because there's a lot of things you could judge about me. But it's a natural reaction at times, when you're around different types of people. And we just have to constantly remind ourselves to extend that grace, to understand that you really have no idea sometimes what somebody's story is, and encourage others to be willing to be a village and be a participant in other people's lives. Because, I'm not suffering, as Dr. T said, from bipolar, but I'm one of those people who don't have a whole lot of family or anything like that. And so we have to be intentional about even finding our village and be open to sharing it, like you've been so open, Charita. And I think that has been a tremendous help and blessing. And I'm excited. I'm happy that you have had a tremendous triumph over something that was, intended and said that you wouldn't. So it's been great. And I thank you so much for being a part of the show. Thank you all. So we out. We're going to close out.